Hi everybody, my name is Joel A. Sutherland. I'm the author of the best-selling Haunted Canada series, and I've been invited to share some true Canadian ghost stories for the Marigold Public Library System Summer Reading Club. I am so excited, and so I wanted to thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I love sharing true Canadian ghost stories, and I love talking to kids, and I'm even a librarian myself. That's my day job. This is my night job. I write here in my creepy, unfinished basement. And what I thought I would do for you guys is go through the books I've written in the series. I started writing at Haunted Canada 4, and I've got all the way up to Haunted Canada 9, and in fact Haunted Canada 10 is even coming out this summer in August 2020. So I thought what I would do, I'd go through the books I've written that have been published so far, so 4 to 9, and give you the top 6 scariest or most fascinating stories in Alberta. I'm going to start with Haunted Canada 4, and take you to a place called Fort Saskatchewan. This is a few hours north of the Marigold Public Library System, and the story I wrote about in number 4 is called The Mob Princess. This is a really fascinating story because this is now a museum in Alberta, but it used to be the Northwest Mounted Police Outpost. In 1923, somebody was executed, a criminal. And her name was Florence Costanzo. She was nicknamed the Mob Princess, and she was the only female who was executed at this location. Today, people visiting the museum see her ghost quite regularly. There's a lot of reports of lights turning on and off, of objects moving on their own, and people see faces in windows. My favorite account is from somebody that works at the museum, and she was there in Halloween one year doing a fright night for kids. Perfect time and setting to see a ghost. She didn't see the ghost at first. In fact, she saw a big, cloudy, misty shape, so she started taking a bunch of pictures. And when she looked at her pictures later on, she saw the face of the Mob Princess staring out at her. Kind of creepy stuff. There's even a picture here of Florence, the Mob Princess. Those are her mugshots that are included in this book. So there you have it. There's the scariest story in Alberta from Haunted Canada 4. Let's move on to Haunted Canada 5. We're now going to Lac La Biche, which is even a little further north from Fort Saskatchewan. This is a story called Dream a Little Nightmare. You'll see that there's a hand brushing away some dirt and leaves from a tombstone. That's a little spoiler of what's going to happen in this story. This is a story about a woman named Isabel who traveled to the Lac La Biche mission, and she was there with her sister and her nieces, and they were sightseeing, and she was the one, Isabel, who brushed the dirt and leaves off of the tombstone, revealing the name Emma Ladouceur. But as soon as Isabel touched the tombstone, she had an immediate cold sensation come over her entire body, and she actually felt like she had been electrocuted, like this odd energy had passed from the tombstone right into her body, shocking her. She started feeling kind of unwell, a little sick, and she had a headache, so they went back to their hotel. And later that night, Isabel fell into a really deep and troubled sleep, and she started to actually believe that she was Emma Ladouceur, the name on the tombstone. In the dream, she knew that she was Emma, and Emma was dying. And Isabel actually felt like she was dying in real life as well. Now, meanwhile, Isabel's sister was looking on very scared and concerned because Isabel was looking really sick and terrible. So the sister started shaking her and yelling at her and forced her to wake up just in time. And Isabel thinks that she might have died if she'd not have been woken up by her sister. Now, a little bit later, Isabel found an old book with archival photographs in it from Lac La Biche. She started flipping through the pages, and she came across a picture, and she couldn't believe it because she saw Emma Ladouceur just like she had looked herself when she was dreaming, even though she had never seen a picture of Emma before. She had only seen the tombstone with the name. There was also another picture, one that we were able to find for this book, of the house at Lac La Biche, where Emma's father could be seen. But there's something unusual in this picture. Well, I'll just show you. Take a look here. You see, this is the house. These are some people here. And over here is Emma's father. And if you look really closely, his face is completely obscured by a white spot right here. Right over his face. It's the only bit of damage to the photo, and it's right there obscuring his head. It's very unusual and actually a little bit creepy. You can go to my YouTube channel, Joel A. Sutherland, and watch me read that story. Okay, moving on to Haunted Canada 6. Alright, so for this story, we're going to Crow's Nest Pass, which is actually a little south of the Marigold Public Library System. There's some mines there near a small town named Frank. And a tour guide has actually had some pretty scary experiences. She regularly hears canaries chirping away in the mines. You might have heard the expression, a canary in a coal mine. And that's based on the fact that they used to take cages of canaries down into the mines, and if the canary died and stopped chirping, then they knew there was too much gas in the air and they had to get all the miners out as quick as possible to save them. She also one day heard the voices of many men and their feet stomping on the ground as they exited the mine, but when she looked, nobody was there. In 1903, on April 29th, 82 million tons of limestone broke free from the mountain. Here's a picture of it. Out of 600 inhabitants that lived in Frank, more than 70 people lost their lives. So that's why people today believe this site is haunted. It is actually, to this day, Canada's biggest and deadliest rock slide. The rocks are still there, like you saw in that picture that I just showed you. And so people go hiking, and sometimes they see miners off in the distance who disappear as they approach. Children play on the rocks, and they have often reported having a really sickening feeling in their stomach as they're playing there. And one day, actually, an archaeologist was accosted by the ghost of a miner who was wielding a pickaxe and yelling at him, chasing him, telling him to leave. So the archaeologist obeyed. He got out of there as fast as he could. So that's the story in Haunted Canada 6, which now takes us on to Haunted Canada 7. So this story is set in Lethbridge, Alberta, which is a little south of the Marigold Public Library System, not too far from Crow's Nest Pass. And it's the Galt Museum and Archives, which actually used to be a hospital. In 1933, a local farmer named George was taken to the hospital, and he had to have some routine surgery, but there was a tragic accident. The elevator started moving just as he was being wheeled in, and he ended up plummeting down to the bottom. Now, he actually survived the fall, but died a little bit later, and ever since, people have seen his ghost shuffling along in the basement. They've felt cold blasts whenever he's near, and often hear his feet, even if they can't see him. He's not alone, though. There's other ghosts in the museum, too. Here's a picture of it. Often people see children staring out from the second floor windows out onto the street. In fact, the picture, the illustration that goes along with the story shows that. And that's because the second floor is believed to have once been the ward for sick children. There was a grade 4 class on a school visit to the museum, and one little boy named Jeff started asking who the nurse was and why was there a nurse in the museum. And nobody else could see this nurse, not even the tour guide said, no, there's nobody else here. But they came to believe that he was seeing maybe a ghost of a nurse who was left behind, just like the children upstairs and George in the basement. To this day, the elevator apparently still travels up and down on its own, leading people to believe that George is still traveling from the basement to the second floor of the building, which is a little odd. You'd think after what happened to him, he might take the stairs. I wanted to read that one or share a little bit of that story too, because I've actually been to Lethbridge. I was lucky enough to get to go there a couple years ago for Word on the Street, and I got to see firsthand the Galt Museum and Archives. Okay, that takes us on to Haunted Canada 8. So this story is set in Airdrie, Alberta. It's the closest one to the Marigold Public Library System. And this is probably one of the most unique stories I think I've ever covered in the entire Haunted Canada series. It's called Phantom Flight. And this is a true story about a man whose name was Clive. And in 1992, he got a really odd telephone call. from the Airdrie airport where he had a small plane. And he was told by the person that worked at the airport that his plane, all on its own, had started flying. It had taken off, it had flown through the sky, and then it had landed on top of another plane, which was really odd. And they said that your plane, Clive, is still on top of this other plane. So Clive rushed to the airport. He didn't really know how any of this had happened. He couldn't make sense of it. And when he got there, it made even less sense because the plane had actually landed right on top of the plane, not the way he had anticipated. He thought maybe it was sitting on top of it, but it had actually flipped over and landed on its top, on the top of the other plane, and somehow was balancing impossibly there. Now, that didn't make any sense. They thought no human could possibly make a landing like that. So they were trying to figure out what to do, how to get this plane off of the other plane without damaging either, when all of a sudden, Clive's plane took off again from upside down on top of that one plane. It started flying on its own, even though no one was clearly in the cockpit. It started flying up into the sky, even more than 100 meters up, where it did a perfect loop and then came crashing down to Earth. But before it did make impact and explode, it swiveled up and made a perfect landing. They knew that somehow a ghost was flying that plane. So Clive decided he would do a little research, and he discovered that the plane used to be owned by somebody who had actually crashed in a helicopter in the Yukon. And so he became convinced that the previous owner still was flying his plane, a 1940s Piper J3 Cub, just like this one here. And in retrospect, he realized that he actually had a weird feeling when he had bought that plane. He had a bad sixth sense sort of sensation that there was something ominous about it, but he couldn't put his finger on it. And since he got such a good deal for the plane, he just went ahead and bought it anyway. I think he lived to regret that. All right, we're heading on to our last story, Haunted Canada 9. So for this last story, we're going to Tofield, and this is just a little east of Fort Saskatchewan, the very first story that I read from Haunted Canada 4 with the Ma Princess. This is another fascinating one because the setting of this story is the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village, a living museum, which I love visiting these places. They bring the past to life, and they're a little bit creepy too. The guards and people that work in the museum have had all kinds of creepy encounters. They regularly hear footsteps in empty buildings. They hear pots and pans clanging together. Many employees there have seen ghosts walk through walls. One woman even once was outside and saw a man on a wagon being pulled by two black horses. She had a really bad, odd feeling about this man who was waving her to get into the wagon. She ran back into the barn where she was working, grabbed a walkie-talkie to call someone for help, looked back over where the man and the horses had just been a second ago, and they were gone. They had completely disappeared. Now, one of the most famous, or maybe I should say infamous stories, and it's one that many people have experienced, is hearing crying sounds of a baby late at night from one of the houses, which is just so creepy to me. And some of the guards have even gone into the building to investigate, thinking somebody had snuck in there, maybe someone with a small child, and they'll see a woman rocking a cradle with a crying baby in it, trying to get the baby to sleep, which is even creepier than just thinking of hearing the crying baby alone. Here's actually a picture of what the guards have seen when they've rushed in to the house. Now, it's believed that this woman here rocking the cradle is Vasilina Hareliak, who used to own this house. It was actually moved to the village in 1967 following her death. She had 9 children, so a really big family. Here's a family portrait. And Vasilina is sitting right here. So this is the woman that's reported seen rocking the baby to sleep all these years after she died. Super creepy and fun. The thing I love about this series is that they're really historical books disguised as ghost stories. Yes, they are true ghost stories, but when you read these books, you learn so much about Canadian history. And so that's one of the things I love so much about writing these books, and hopefully that's one of the things you love about reading these books as well. So thank you, everyone. Again, I appreciate your time. I really appreciate the Marigold Public Library for inviting me to do this. This is so much fun. I hope everybody participates in the Summer Reading Club. It's a bit of an unusual summer, of course, but librarians across the country are working really hard to make sure it's still a special summer and that all our kids from coast to coast are reading and writing and learning throughout these summer months. Thank you so much to everybody for watching. Visit my website at joelasutherland.com if you want more information about me and my books. And in the meantime, I just want to wish you all a very spooky summer.